Okay, cool. Let's get into the discussion. All right. Thanks for your patience, Vivek, while we kind of get some of those things out of the way.
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm sorry I couldn't join last week. I forget there was
Mm-mm.
something that happened and I couldn't join. I'll share my screen. The context for the discussion is MCP, Model Context Protocol, and comparing it with the Agent to Agent Protocol. Not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but trying
Mm,
to understand what is MCP, what is A2A, what is the relevancy of each, and how can the two of them play together in the data ops ecosystem primarily and eventually branch out into the ML ops and the other operational ecosystems. So the one line summary is in model context protocol, we are it's almost like a waterfall approach to project management where you have the right context, the right tools, the right resources, everything which you know you'll require to perform a job. You have all of that, and that is presented to whatever is the downstream consumer of it, be it an AI agent, be it something else. So that is MCP. And in A2A, you don't have any of the context. You don't have anything. Think of it as a smart memoryless system where at runtime, you know what you want to execute and it intelligently meets with or interacts with other agents and pulls the data. For example, an MCP, an agent or some workflow using an MCP agent can publish all of its information, all of its context onto a Kafka stream somewhere. And you might have three or four agents utilizing A2A agents, which can then pull in the right information out of those Kafka streams and perform the activities almost entirely independently.
So A2A assumes that the agent is intelligent enough to be able to identify the relevant
Yes,
information. Where so it's like a
yes,
top-down approach, whereas MCP is like a bottom-up approach. It presents all of the information that you would need in a predefined way for whatever
yes.
wants to reach it. Interesting.
And then what is the benefit of having MCP and A2A? In terms of the MCP itself, because you're creating all the things which you believe are required ahead of time, developers will not have to manually or separately create API access. They don't have to worry too much about, okay, for this data source, for this protocol, for this, I have to do this. Instead, they will have a generic set of here are all the, it's almost like, what would I, what's it called? Like an API contract where you have 10 or 15 different things that you're publishing. Now it is up to the A2 agents or anything that is downstream to
Mhm.
decide of those 15 things, what do I want to pick? Do I need A, B, or C, or do I need A, C, and D, or do I need all A to Z from there? So from the A2A perspective, there is we don't have to hard code different logics into the work streams.
Mhm.
Your interaction with the A2A agent, for example, maybe on Slack, somebody says, hey, what is happening in this state with respect to that project? And the A2A agent, which is continuously listening to the conversations, will be able to, in theory at least, pull that information and present that information. So MCP is looking at it from an infrastructure standpoint of providing all the necessary context, all the necessary information ahead of time. And then the agents, you don't have to worry about hard coding any of that logic into it. It can be one agent, two agents, 10 agents. Using the A2A protocol, there is possibility for it to be very successful in a heterogeneous environment. So there is more autonomy in how the tasks are executed.
Right. This is interesting. And so I think one of the really and I'm curious, Vivek, because you've done such a deep dive into this. How do you feel like the creators affect the context? Because MCP was created by Anthropic, which is really meant to be safe AI, right? But it's still like a very core AI company, whereas ATA was released by Google. Which when I think of Google, I actually don't think of agentic development that much. But I am curious like how you feel like that has shaped the I guess the motivation behind releasing these protocols.
Based on my research so far, MCP is supposed to act as that foundational layer
Mhm.
where it is like a sink of, I shouldn't say a sink of sorts, but it's a lake of sorts. And the A2A agents, think of them as birds which are flying into that pool to pick up a fish or weeds or whatever. So
Hmm.
MCP is more to set that foundational base, a solid
Yeah.
foundational base, and A2A is taking advantage of that solid base out there. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah.
A2A is more meant for downstream consumption and for
Hmm.
doing a bunch of tasks autonomously. But the MCP protocol itself is more to standardize how this data is generated, how are those API contracts set up, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I posted this somewhere else, but this is a really like kind of hot take that I have. But the way that I think of MCP is literally as a service mesh, and so there's this idea of
That's
yeah, a data mesh out there where like it's like this very socio-techno like data architecture style that like has like people either hate it or love it, but it's this idea that as a data team or as a department or even as like a whatever, like let's say you're an HR team, not even like a data team, but just like you own your specific data. You then like create a service that hosts that data and then you own it as a data product. And then, if you're using Kafka or something, you can create like Kafka streams that people can subscribe to. But essentially, that ownership is you at the end of the day. And so there's like a very clear provenance and people aspect to the marketplace. Whereas I think of MCP as being that high level architecture, but like the complete opposite way of running it, where it's like, okay, let's just have all of this data served as like an MCP layer instead. But it's still, in my opinion, who would own the MCP within like a company or within a team is very questionable, right? Like, yeah, like I think of MCP sources as being like based on the technology. So let's say I'm using like Airbyte, and I create an MCP for Airbyte or even Gravitino, it's like whoever's using the Airbyte MCP, like that can be any piece of data that you have, because that touches almost every single piece of data in your company. But you're not necessarily like the governance around that is really questionable because you're just running through the MCP server, right?
Yep.
So the way that it's broken down is very different. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that will be one of the challenges when it comes to the ownership of this MCP protocol itself. I
Hmm.
personally think of it as belonging with the data governance teams, where
Hmm.
they set the the guidelines and the rules and everything, and every team is using this MCP protocol while adhering to those guidelines and norms and everything. So maybe the data warehouse team will be the one to actually own and build it. But again, I
Hmm.
think now that as I'm saying it, it can be handled in so many ways. If there is enough oversight and governance available in an organization and they have enough number of people, I think in that ideal scenario, every team will be able to have its own MCP that they support and host,
Yeah.
and all of it will be going into a centralized MCP lake of some sort. And
Hmm.
then, so this will be, I think you put it very well, some sort of a service mesh or a data mesh layer where all of that data is being published, and then A2A agents will be the subscribers of those topics, and they can also be publishers, but not of the protocol itself, but the data. And one of the bigger risks I was thinking of when I was putting this comparison together is in terms of A2A, there is a lot of risk in terms of agents just spamming the life out of the different data
Yeah.
streams and whatnot. There is no easy way right now to figure out which is, of course, you can force everything to go be behind TLS and everything to sort of at least have only authenticated requests coming in. But
Hmm.
there is there isn't enough in terms of governance, not from a compliance standpoint, but purely from a is the agent operating the way it is supposed to operate, or is it going haywire and hallucinating and starting to hit the same service over and over and over again? Because the A2A agent protocol itself, it is memoryless, it is stateless. It forgets once the transaction is complete, it forgets. So if something is able to trick the agent into performing the same action over and over
Hmm.
again, it can it can lead to exhaustion of all your API calls and not.
Oh, that's so, oh my God, there's so many chewy things in here. Let me, okay, I'm gonna like definitely, we're gonna have like multiple threads going on at the same time. I hope you can
Yeah,
handle. Um, So at first, when I thought about data mesh versus MCP mesh, right? Because it is like a service mesh, I used to think that they were incompatible. But the way that I think about it now, based off this conversation, is maybe you have your domain team that owns their data, and then they put it into like some sort of like, live table, and then you build the MCP off that. So the MCP is not necessarily a mix of different technologies that you're having to serve, and it's not necessarily like having like, a Google Drive MCP, but instead, like, let's say a Postgres MCP, like just to use Postgres as an example, that Postgres data is probably something that is like the endpoint of a lot of different data sources that's owned by a specific domain or team put together. And that's like the live transactional table that then, MCP can serve off of. Maybe that's the governance play to have it more controlled instead of going straight from source data. But also, like, so for instance, the way that Gravitino's MCP server works is that it goes straight to the entire data infrastructure that you have, which is like crazy to think about, but also like really tough to differentiate what the domain is that you're trying to look in. It's almost like a catch-all. Like I just have an MCP server that goes to the entire lake. Is that a good or bad thing? It's good for data ops type agents, but it's not good for like domain or subject matter agents, right? Um, and the second thing that you said with the agent to agent protocol is that I actually think that it's really ripe for injection attacks. Like that seems like something that if I were to inject some sort of logic in there externally, it would be very hard to catch, in my
yeah.
opinion. And like you said, that there would be repeated like actions that could be just spammed and spammed and spammed. But also, I think that you might even be able to like, instead of like thinking about a SQL injection attack or injecting even just logic, you might be able to just inject your own agent in there that acts as a bad actor. And that might be something that it can maybe take the context. But yeah, I don't know. The limited context windows that you're describing in A2A, if I understand correctly, could also be a problem. I don't know if you
Yeah,
have any other thoughts.
it's it's like a double-edged sword. If it works very well, then it'll be very autonomous, very intelligent, and in the sense that it can do a lot of things without needing intervention. But the
Yeah.
same thing can work against us in this exactly because an agent can orchestrate other agents, and those agents can orchestrate other agents. So even if it's not intentional, if what is being asked of, if it's not interpreted correctly, for example, if there's an agent interacting with another agent and it's purely, maybe this might not happen, but if it's interacting purely based on human text conversations, it may not interpret it the right way depending upon how that agent is working and what data is being transferred. So it can unintentionally set off a series of events. So I think it'll force people to take a security first approach whenever
Yeah.
they begin in
This
implementing
is,
this
yeah.
combination.
Sorry if this is a dumb question, but oh. So in are agents then in this context stateful or stateless? Like let's say I have a very specific agent that does a specific like domain or action. Is it spinning up a new agent every single time, or is it just an agent that holds the context? And like there's pros and cons to each of that. Like I'm trying to fit it within like a cloud distributed framework. Maybe that's the wrong idea, but
Both are possible depending
yeah.
upon how it is being used. The protocol itself is purely to be a consumer of information and then a disperser of that information or doing follow on tasks
Yeah.
succeeding that. So it can be stateful and it can be stateless, but it is only for the context of that window of operation. Once that is
Yeah.
gone, it again goes back to like a cold state of sorts, or like a, I forget the exact word for that, but it will be on standby until a task comes in. And once that task is done, it again forgets everything.
Yeah, like it's idle. I could see us moving towards memory then, because I can see it being kind of painful to not have, because one of the benefits of potentially having an intelligent agent is that it ideally learns and gets better over time, right? That it
Yeah.
learns to do something more efficiently. At least that could be that's the idea instead of doing the action, however, like maybe you've predefined it in some sort of way, or at least at the same low level. And that's kind of the differentiator in the market is how good an agent can do a particular task, right? Now, any sort of agent is seen as like a benefit,
Yeah.
but there will be a future differentiator for that. And I'm wondering what your ideas of like that future.
Personally, I think it'll be one, a security first approach to
Yeah.
building these agents for compliance sake. And then second is a cost optimized approach, or rather monitoring first approach. So security and monitoring first. That way, anytime an agent is operating, there is a clear trace of what agent is doing what operation and resulting in how much cost. So everything is tracked live instead of an afterthought, usually, which is the case in most companies. You do not know ahead of time what is the cost going to be and what are the security implications going to be. So that is how I see it from the compliance standpoint. And from a from an intelligence standpoint, I view it exactly the way you were sharing it earlier, where agents become smarter, they keep getting more and more context, and that way they're not having to re-trigger, I don't know, 10 or 15 different agents to get the same context over and over again. For example, maybe if it's an automated Slack or a Microsoft Teams conversation, there's a repetitive question which is asked by drivers or asked by support, or people ask customer success for all those things.
Mhm.
If you have an intelligent agent that has that context somewhere, it doesn't have to re-trigger its fleet of agents to get the same information. So it's able to simply say, hey, an agentic workflow is not required here. We just need a simple lookup of a table somewhere. So I think that is the world I foresee, where the agent, every time it gets that answer or it performs an action, the results, the question, and all those things are stored somewhere, and like a hash map or something of that sort. And the next
Mhm.
time a question comes, it intelligently determines whether it should kick off a fleet of agents to perform that action, or if there's a simpler, cost effective way of doing it.
Yeah. So I had to do a cursory Google search just now, and I might be wrong, but because I don't know too much about the under the hood of how agents are deployed. Are people using Kubernetes to deploy agents? Like that sounds like an actual nightmare. Like how are agents deployed? Have you seen like how? Like what is I
No, unfortunately, no, that I have not researched. How does it actually run itself?
Isn't that a relevant question for us?
No, it's actually very relevant. I haven't gotten to that part
Yeah,
yet.
right? And the fact that we're like, I'm even just thinking about this just now, and it's only because we're in this meeting. I'm gonna Google this. How is, like, okay, so what is going on? Okay, so all the only thing I'm seeing is like agentic framework for Kubernetes. Oh my God, is this how people are deploying Kubernetes? So apparently Microsoft's all of their agents run on their Kubernetes clusters, which is so weird. Okay, I'm gonna do the Victor thing and spam a bunch of random links because this is a cool rabbit hole to go down. Because the stuff that we're talking about, it has to be implemented somehow in the cloud, right? Is this relevant? I'm so confused.
I
But
think this is a nice transition for a future meeting.
yeah, no, it really is. Okay, this is gonna be a part two. I mean, we even like moved forward from MCP straight to A2A, which is kind of hilarious, but that's the beauty of these. Like,
I wouldn't be surprised if they're all just running on Kubernetes. We run Kafka in-house on a Kubernetes cluster. Like, think about that. We run Kafka on Kubernetes, and that's what has been working really well.
yeah.
Part of the challenge when I was researching this was the search results are not very accurate, because when you talk about an agent, it really does not know what you're talking about until you have a series of follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And there are so many levels of abstractions on top of abstractions that the underlying implementation itself is usually not talked about.
Right. Okay, yeah. Looking at I'm trying to find an architecture diagram. This is how you know that nobody's really building it. Hold on. Can you open this? This is like a blog post I found that goes over like the Kafka Flink stack. There you go. And I put the source down. Um, okay. Let's go through some of this because I feel like this is important, I guess. Like, okay. Um, Interesting. So I know that Confluent had a data mesh strategy, pretty clear set. And I guess now they're using those Kafka streams as MCP tools, essentially, and they're converting them. I didn't even know that there was an MCP server for these sort of Kafka streams, but I guess there are. So this is very high level from what I understand, but the A2A protocol, then it interacts with, okay, so there's an A2A messaging topic that's here. So Kafka is literally doing everything in terms of its backend. And I like that Flink is just there ingesting for just for the sake of ingesting and pushing those changes as well, but I guess that makes sense. I actually don't know if Kafka is the right tool for this compared to, say, like a Cassandra even, or like some sort of other like highly transactional like embedded database. Like even DuckDB might be a better tool for this. I'm wondering. Okay. Maybe we should have gone through this at the beginning, but I don't know. This seems maybe a little bit too straightforward, is my feeling.
I can see how Kafka might be a standard choice in these cases because the data is short-lived unless, of course, you're storing them as compacted or something. But at a very simple level, either a pub sub or just some kind of a Kafka topic, I think it might be making it simpler because the assumption is the data will be short-lived. It's going to live on the topic for a certain retention with a certain
Hmm.
retention period. And then once the agentic workflow is done, I think the data gets deleted off the topic. But I can see how it can also be supported using DuckDB or Cassandra, for instance, where
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what you were sharing earlier in terms of having a stateful, smart mechanism where you have long-lived data and agents are relying on that and not purely based on at runtime pulling in
Hmm.
information. So I think in a truly transactional setting, maybe Cassandra will be more successful as that data source.
Yeah. Well, the way that I wonder about it too is that if you're using Kafka as your entire backend, then depending on the time that the agent is trying to access this data, it might get a different message because that's the whole point of streaming is that you get your eventual consistency. And I like the stream governance is not necessarily there either, right? Because Kafka's not really built for that. But the interesting thing here too is that like Confluent also released table flow. So I'm wondering if you, you have an iceberg table that sits under this that you also run the MCP server off of. Um, but yeah, I don't know. So TableFlow is pretty straightforward. So Confluent released their own internal engine called Cora, and all it does is that it takes Kafka topics and then it writes them to iceberg tables, and then it syncs between the two. And the caveat here is that you end up with a lot of really small iceberg tables, which is kind of like not what iceberg is meant for. Is everybody's trying to use iceberg as like a streaming technology, but it was never meant for that. um but it's just because iceberg is so hot right now, and it's a lake technology and everybody else is using it, so it makes your Kafka data much more accessible to the larger ecosystem in terms of batch analytics is the idea. But yeah, this is weird. This is interesting. I don't even know where to go from this. Like,
It looks like these are all very early designs and models because it's
yeah.
people are only now getting into this and supporting. This was one article I was reading earlier, which coincidentally is the same website which you shared earlier when you read.
Which is, I never heard of VentureBeat before. Even the
You
website.
haven't heard of it before?
No, I'm not
Oh.
reading enough articles. I'm getting so much stuff from LinkedIn these days, which is a bad sign, I think.
This doesn't go into a lot of detail, but
Yeah.
to your point, most of this work is like really, really new, and people are only now getting started in terms of figuring out how do they do this, what's the right way to adopt, where does it fit in.
Yeah. I found a more clear image of the Kafka implementation. And I'll post the link too. I don't know if it's really that much clearer. I think when you have your arrows taking three different turns. I mean, okay. Oh, maybe this makes it more complicated. So I don't know if the addition of MongoDB is is making it easier. Okay. What is a lead here? Am I? Okay, so this is a sales driven system, so that's why there's a lead. So let's say you have like a sales agent, and that's why it's got like lead scoring and lead ingestion. And so you have a specific lead form, which captures some sort of sales data for a sales lead. It goes into the backend for a MongoDB store, which makes sense for a form. And then those incoming leads are then abstracted into some sort of other database. I don't know if that's also supposed to be Mongo, but then Flink ingests that and then pushes it to a Kafka topic. So publishes that, creates a copy, and then I don't know what an agent message is. Like, is it just a stream that's meant specifically for agents in this case?
Looks like a Kafka topic to me, or some kind of a database where you have either
Yeah.
short-lived or long-lived messages.
I mean, it's in Confluent Cloud, right? So it ideally is Kafka. Or yeah, Confluent Kafka. And then whatever map inbound message to agent. I don't know what that means. But I guess an agent is it's presented in a way that's friendly to agents. I don't know. Agent predictions. And then you have different agents for different parts of the sales cycle and actions there. I like that you're having the LLM doing this mapping to whatever the agent is. Maybe this stuff is too. Can we put this off for a year and then?
Although I personally feel introducing the LLM here might add to more complications or
I was gonna
more,
say that sounds like a nightmare.
yeah, like I have agent messages going to agent predictions. I don't even know if there's an agent predictions thing is required here. In my head, the agent messages directly would be mapping to one of these
Yeah, right? Like
action agents, lead scoring, whatever they are, send an email agent.
like
Because
I
the whole idea is
yeah.
agents already know what action to perform. The protocol has the MCP protocol itself is publishing all the necessary context, and the agent already knows what to take to orchestrate what activity. So I think I'll have to do more research to understand why is this mapping necessary and why does it have to go through a separate agent protections. I don't know if it's for governance or for traceability.
Yeah, I agree as well. Let me see. Maybe I should not be so dumb and actually read the article for once instead of just looking to a picture and trying to assume I can understand. I um like does he say what? Okay, so it says the agents have no explicit dependencies on each other. They simply produce and consume events independently, which I think is actually not good, right? Like, I think the context matters a lot. I think that's what makes a good salesperson is that they're able to
Yeah.
pivot and take actions based off of context. Um, the orchestrator uses external model inference. Um, in Flink, this model receives the message, evaluates its contacts, and then assigns it to the correct agent. So you have this pool of messages and data, and maybe the assumption is like, yeah, you don't want the agent to have the full context, so you want to block it off and assign an agent to context in some way. I don't know if that really. I feel like a generic agent would be better. Like, why not just have a salesperson agent than like trying to break that up into 5 different agents that are even more microservices that are we didn't even get to the maintainability aspect of like this sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this
Yeah.
landscape evolves.
Well, this is so interesting because it reminds me a lot of like when we first got into AI, what did we do? We fine-tuned a ton of these models, right? And then we put all these resources into creating specialized models. Like if you want to do this, use this model. And then it was just so unmaintainable and hard to update. Nobody wanted to put in that work, and it was very expensive to train the model. And so once a generic good model came out and it didn't even have to perform better at that particular task, it just had to be good enough, everybody flocked to it. And that's why we all have like these like GPT versus Claude, like it's very similar few top models that actually rule the landscape. And I feel like agents would probably be the exact same way, like just having one master agent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of having all these specialized agents. And then even like reducing down the complexity again, even with the MCP servers, because we're supposed to technically be talking about MCP, is like having one master MCP server that, you know, maybe can intelligently access all of the endpoints underneath it and pull context intelligently as needed versus just constantly serving up all of this context as an MCP server, because the service is still a service that you have to run.
Yeah.
And there's still like a uptime and SLA that you have to associate with it, right? Like it's not like super.
I think it will make the lives of observability teams and the infrastructure teams difficult if the
Yeah.
right architecture is not followed. I think having that global MCP server running with all the information is probably the right approach. It actually makes me wonder, not even makes me wonder, I think it will be a great topic for one of the upcoming posts.
Yeah.
The
Well, I mean,
thoughts on,
I would love to do this as part of a blog post series. I think you have some really good information on there too. Um, I don't know if Jesse, you want to help us out with that, but it's just like everything in this conversation has been so juicy. Like we have so many cool topics that we've covered here.
yeah.
We didn't even call in Victor. Victor would have loved to have been here for that. Victor's gonna look at this meeting and be like, I can't believe I missed this.
Well, I'm gonna put it like MCP versus A2A, and
Yeah.
and we can share it. I think
No, we're doing a podcast now. Sorry, Vivek. We're stealing you. We're gonna make you famous.
No, this is a great conversation. There's so
Yeah.
many. When I started looking into it, like I made multiple versions of it between last week and the week before, and everything is getting like more and more like how much information do I capture? How much should I not capture? So it's a very exciting,
You
or
want
at least it's
this?
helping us take that
Yeah.
real deep dive approach into separating smoke and mirror.
If you're comfortable, can you link like a view only or like a copy version of this in the
Oh
meeting?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
This
will.
is like I think really cool stuff, and it's a continuous conversation we should have.
Yeah,
Like yeah, it's really exciting for sure. And I'd love to even just extrapolate out this conversation and post it on like LinkedIn as a video or something like that. Like something that
I think that would be really nice.
Well, that's
And
what I was gonna do. I was gonna like, cut it, and then we can post this in a blog if you want, like the table even.
yeah, we can post a table on just like a video and just the video embedded instead of
Yeah,
having to do like a
exactly.
full text blog. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Vivek's done a lot of really good work here. We should position him as being like the leader of this conversation. He's done a lot of really good research and I really liked his insights. Yeah, I can tell you
I'll
so much about this.
I'll be honest, this was like very overwhelming and confusing at the same time because each time you read somebody publishes a new article, you go through it and you form your ideas, your thoughts, your opinions, challenging the ideas. And then you read another one and then you realize, oh, that is true as well. Now, how do I integrate those two? And then you go to a third, and then you go to Google, you go to Anthropic, you go to all these things. And then it's like, there is so much. And then our tech brain starts thinking about, not even tech brain, like just the common sense brain starts thinking about all the risks associated with it, and then agents going haywire, and then the
Yeah.
costs associated with it. How do we control all those things? So I think this will end up being a multi-part blog.
Yeah.
Starting,
This is a book. This is an actual book.
that's book. I
Like,
think the book is more
yeah.
honest.
Like we mentioned observability right at the very end, but that's like the whole issue here. Like that is a whole Pandora's box. How do you even observe an agent? Jesse says that he's happy to try and make this for dummies English, if we want to make a post. I mean, Vivek, if you're interested, I mean, Jesse's probably happy to take the lead on it. I don't want to put
Oh
words in.
yeah, that would be great. So if there are things which I have wrong, or because I'm also learning along the way with all of you, if there are aspects which are not incorrect or they're not
Yeah.
100% accurate, I think having additional hands will make sure that we're conveying the right information.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. Usually when we do a birds of a feather, I get very concerned if like not a ton of people show up, but I'm actually kind of glad it was just me and you. And selfishly, because I felt like I got to pick your brain like throughout this entire thing and oh, yeah, I'm so happy that you did the deep dive on this instead of me because I had so many questions.
The other interesting thing which you just mentioned was when I started off, as you can see, like I put auditability logging, the compliance part towards the very end, but during the conversation, I realized this has to be number one, like security and auditing. This has to go to the top. Like no one cares about the purpose, modality, and how is the state handled. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
it has to lead with this section.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I think maybe in the next meeting or the one after that, looking into practical scenarios, hopefully we'll have time to do some more research to figure out how do we actually integrate, how do we come up with real world use cases of using MCP and A2A, A2A being a consumer of the MCP protocol and
Yeah.
the real world example.
Like I am really curious, like how are people deploying agents? Like even just that very basic question. I'm
Yeah.
actually concerned that I don't know the answer. And I'm even more concerned that you also don't know the that's a really bad sign. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe as I'm doing a deeper look into the Kubernetes community for their CNAI landscape, I'll see if anybody is using it. But yeah, Jesse, we're all kids right now playing with chainsaws. Like that's the best way that I could describe it. Nobody knows what's happening anymore.
Is this the point where we summon Victor and he figures it out in about 2 days?
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
We've hit our ceiling. It's time to call Victor.
I think if he had figured it out, wouldn't he,
Be a
be buried in
millionaire. I
money
don't know.
right now? I don't know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we're at time. I'm really happy that we got to have this chat and we can continue to have more of these chats too. I think that there's a lot of really good threads. And I'm also excited for my opinions to change 2 weeks from now based on new information. Especially because of the Snowflake and the Databricks conferences. There's probably new information. This space is changing constantly. Yeah, who knows?
You can also invite people who maybe have different opinions or,
Yeah.
present. That would be interesting. Yeah.
I would love to hear somebody from Confluent, right? Because I do want to challenge whether or not Kafka is really like I see the temptation and I see why, and it made sense for data mesh, but for some reason I'm not bought into it with MCP and A2A as much. And I'm not sure why that is. But I don't know, Vivek, would you be interested in that? I know a few of their folks.
It'll be cool as long as it's not a sales call to us. That's
Yeah.
not the intent.
Yeah, definitely.
But I
Okay.
think it'll be very interesting to understand their perspective of why they're taking that approach. Or is it because that's the tool they support and they are confident in it being very good? I don't
Yeah,
know.
or is it like a bit of quote unquote clout chasing? Maybe a bit of both. Okay, awesome. I'm going to end off this interview. Thanks everybody. And yeah, see you in a couple weeks. And thank you again to Vivek for hosting this conversation with us and doing all of this incredible research and leading this.
Thank you so much for facilitating. I was concerned I wouldn't last 5 minutes, but I lasted good.
I
Thanks
think
for the to and
you need
fro. It
5
was like I didn't
hours.
realize there was so much to unpack. You're
Yeah.
right. We need a book. We need to write a book.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you write a book, we'll promote it. So. All right.
Yeah.
See you, everyone.
See you all.
Bye.